Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our November webinar this year for the subject of Opera 3 hints, tips, and tricks. Just a webinar where I'm going to talk through some things to remember in Opera 3, some ways of processing, and perhaps some things that we might have forgotten that makes running our system much easier. So welcome, everybody. Thank you very much for joining me today, and I hope you'll find it useful. I certainly remembered and learned a lot in preparing for the webinar today. So in a moment, I'm going to hop over. I'm going to start looking at some of these hints and tricks. In between each slide, I'm going to pop over into Opera. We'll have a look at what I've just said. And some instances, I've got a short video to play. And then we'll end with, if there's anybody, any questions, we can end with that at the end. So let's start off with our very first thing. So I think one of the uh, more important things or areas in Opera 3 that can be used is the favorites menu. This is where each user has the ability to set those areas in Opera that they use on a constant basis in an order that suits them. So they just have to go to the favorites menu and run that. The favorites menu sits in Opera 3 at the top, and the items each user places in that menu can be seen. You can also order those, and we'll see that in a second. The second area I want to show off or talk to you about in this is the preferences area. Each user have a preferences, and within that I've got a bunch of settings, and I'll just have a look through those settings and perhaps why you might want to use those settings for each individual user that has that available to them. So let's hop over into Opera. And as you can see, it goes straight to my favorites menu. A bunch of items have already been placed in the favorites menu. But let's say I'm a payroll person and I do a lot of payroll processing and I go through the whole process in my month period. I can come in here and I can look at what I do. I can add my calculation. Now we've seen the calculation is already there. I might want to add my FPS in there. So how I do that's right click. It tells me it's already included, but I might want to add my, let's just close that. I might want to add my EPS in the list. I right click that, add to my favorites menu. It tells me here which group it's going to place it in. It's going to do it in payroll and it names it for me. I can really just name it here EPS because we know what that means. Say OK to that. But I also might be running things like pay slips, so I can add that to my favorites menu. I might be running things like the produce and list packs. I can add that to my favorites menu. Here in my utilities, I might be doing the nominal analysis. It's already been added. I might do the cash book transfer. Right click again, it's already been added. Now, once I've added these items, you'll notice they come into my list. They sit here at the back. But what do? They're not really in an order that suits me. So up here, you'll see this little icon with a green tick box. It's called the reorder menu. This is twofold usage for me. Firstly, if I click on that, it brings up the order of my menu structure, as you can see at the top. It brings it in that order. I now have the ability to literally just decide to put the favorites at the end. I can drag any of these areas up and down how I want to see it in order there. I can say OK to that. And what happens is it changes that structure and it puts the favorites at the back for me. But within that menu, if I go back within the action button, I have an order favorites menu item. So if I come in here, I can select on my payroll. I can come in here and I can say, okay, in a normal world, an EPS is probably the last thing I'm going to do. Produce and list backs I'll do after that. I'll do a nominal analysis before I do the update. And if I say okay to that, save the changes to this group, and come out of there, it doesn't change for me. The only time it changes is if the user I am logged in as relogs onto the system, and the moment they relog on, those menu items will be reordered in the way they have just asked it to be. So when you do that and you go back to your favorites item and you see it hasn't changed the order, then you can obviously know you need to log in and out to make that appear correctly. So now if I'm the payroll clerk, I can come in here, I can do my calculation, I can do my transfer, do my pay slips, do the backs in this order, for example, the way I've set it. The second area, the second tip we had was our preferences. Now, each user have access or should have access to this preferences area. This is all to do with the user that is logged in and looking at the screen at the moment. So the default company, if I've got a whole host of companies in there, it means that when I log into the system as my user, which company is it going to present to me first? Then I've got all these bunch of options I can use, whether I want to confirm or when I make a decision, do I want the yes, no buttons to appear, or do I just accept what I've done? Accelerate the toolbar key. You'll notice that sits here. And if I'm on a screen where there's a key available that's an accelerator key, like an F key, it shows me what it is and I can use it. If I look at a grid, it separates each line by gray and white background. And if I do searching, does it extend the searching beyond just the normal field I'm searching for? And then a bunch of other changes here, how I want to see the toolbar, small or large, how I'm searching, etc. Also, I can change my own password here. So I haven't got a password set, so there's nothing there, but I can come in here as my user. I can set my new password here. And the last thing to mention, I can use an Opera desktop here, which means I can place a website in there. And when I log into Opera, in this dead space here, the website appears and it sits there. And when I do my work, it runs over the website. For example, you could have the Oasis website on there. And it basically means that when you open your Opera system, that's what you're going to be seeing. And it also means that if my team calls you and says you need they want some remote support, you don't have to leave Opera. You can come in here and you can click on the remote support, and it will create your link and whatever it does for you outside the system, but you can access it within the system. So those were our first two that we had looked at. Let's pop over back to our presentation and looked at the third option we have. So one of the areas that a lot of people are aware of is the context that appears in customers and suppliers for those of us who don't have CRM within our system. Allows us to record a whole host of customers apart from the two that appears on the front screen of the processing for sales ledger and purchase ledger. I'm also going to show you or briefly talk about keyboard shortcuts, how you can actually run the system without picking up a mouse once. And then for the payroll guys out there, two places I can check my current payroll period. So very often we don't know where we are, and it's just easy to make sure. And where do we look at that for? And that's what these two areas are going to look at. So hopping back into Opera, if we go to our sales ledger, for example, in our maintenance area, we have contacts. We set up a label for what kind of contacts we have. We've got exactly the same thing in our purchase ledger where we have contacts. And again, we've got a label list of contacts. And when we create a contact, is who they are, what they are. Within my sales ledger processing then, if I just look at my first record, I will see I have got two contacts on the front page. So I've got my account contact with an email address, my order contact with an email address. This is important because by putting an email address in here, it indicates that I could potentially email documentation out to this customer if they want that or if I want to do that. And secondly, within my action button, I have a contacts area where I can add more than one contact and I can list them here. I can give attributes to them, which have been set up from my contacts list, as you see before, and then use that in processing. You can see the account contact here equals the account contact there, as well as the order contact, which is that one there. I believe it might be that one there. So the order contact there is the order contact there. I can change the contacts here by overtyping information, and it will save it in the background. But on this side, I can actually, if I want to change the order contact, I have to change it to another contact, save it, and choose another one to be the order contact and save it. And in that instance, when I come out of here, the information will change there. But as you can see, in both sales ledger and the purchase ledger, I can create a bunch of new contacts and put information in of who these people are, and save the contact just sits in the list in the bottom. So it's a way of managing contacts within our customers and our suppliers if we do not have CRM. Now, processing keyboard shortcuts. Firstly, when I log on to the system, the first time I am presented with the login screen that you are aware, you put your username and details in. When I double click on the icon with the mouse, this pops up. It actually goes into the user ID. I don't have to use the mice to position anything there. I can just start typing. I can start typing what I want in there. I don't need the mouse to go to the password field. I can use the enter button on the keyboard. I can put the password in. I can put the enter button again. I'm presented with a logon button. I can do two things now. You will notice the L is underwritten, underlined. I can use the Alt button on the keyboard and then the L, and it's going to press log on for me, or I can just use the enter button and it's going to do the same thing for me. Now, immediately you would have noticed when I said the L was underlined, whenever I now see anything underlined in Opera, it means I can use the Alt button with a letter that goes with it. I can also use the arrow keys up and down to navigate throughout the system. So for example, I've logged in, it highlighted the administration area only because it's the first one in my system. Let's say I want to actually go and do a purchase or a sales order. I want to go to supply chain management. I use the Alt key on the keyboard. The moment I press the Alt key, come on, highlight my screen. The moment I press the Alt key, I get the supply chain management. I can S underlined. I can press the S. It goes there. Now I can use my arrow keys up and down and left and right, and that's what I'm doing currently. I'm going to go into my sales order processing. It's opened my screen. I've not touched the mouse so far. I want you to notice on the right hand side of my screen, I've got a bunch of accelerator keys, and I'm going to use the mouse just to draw it closer so you can see it. But in the accelerator keys, it gives me shortcuts I can use on the keyboard for the functions I have for the screen I'm looking at. So the action button, within the action button, I will find all those options there, which I normally will go and click to. I can click with the mouse on the options there, or I can use the F keys to do that. For example, let's say I want to create a new order. I can do Control N there, or I can do the Alt key, go into A for the action button. I can go down to new. I can click the enter button. I'm going to be presented with a warehouse. And there I've got a new order detail. So I can use my tab key to tab through to what I want to do. Um, go to my OK button or Alt O to do that, say OK to that. I'm presented with a screen where I put my items in. Any screen I can use F4 and I can go up and down to navigate to find something to sell. I can press the enter key. It automatically goes to the default quantity that's set in the system. I'm happy with that. I can put any other information in, go through there, highlight that. I use the escape key to make my screen come alive, as we say. Use the Alt for the P in post, and post the order by saying Alt, yeah, yes, or enter. and I now have an order. And in the same way, I can use the F6 key now, if I can see there. I want to get my order now to delivery stage. I can use the F6 key to change it to delivery. And in the same way, I can now use the F9 to progress that order to a delivery, presents me with my areas I can do. I can use the Alt key, whatever I want to do, to go and publish my order. So there you go. And right throughout the system, this is exactly the same idea. For using shortcuts. So I can use the shortcuts right throughout the system. And really, once you are used to it, you actually get to process quite fast through the system. So that's just a way of remembering that you can use all these shortcuts, the underlined letters with an Alt, or if you press the Alt key, anything that becomes available, you'll see at the top, like for example there, the E comes available every time I press the Alt key. So just a shortcut idea. And then the last one we checked out on that screen, and I'm just going to close this now, and I'm going to use the mouse for this, is in payroll. How do I check my current pay period? Well, there's two ways I would do it. So first thing, we can look into the utilities area, pay periods. We can select the period we're looking at. So I want to look at the monthly. It tells me it's period 8. I know period 8 is November month because that's my open period. So I haven't finished my payroll for November month for monthly period yet. So I'm period 8. In exactly the same way, I can check the same thing for my weekly, my 2 weekly, my 4 weekly payrolls, and it will just tell me I'm in week 35 in this instance. Where's the other way I can check that? I can also check it through my calendar, really. So if I look at my monthly calendar there, I'll see in correlation with what I just saw. I said my current period is 8. I can see here at the end, I haven't updated that. So it's my open period. I'm still busy with it. I haven't finished it. So I know what period I am. It also here incidentally tells me my start end dates and the pay date for my period. And exactly the same thing, obviously, in here for something like my weekly payroll. Again, it correlates with what we saw in the other area. So let's pop back to the little presentation, have a quick look what's next. So one of the things we normally get asked this time of the year is how do I put the whole company on holiday? Really just relates to our weekly payroll because it's got to do with the calculation for PAY and NI for those weeks that we're not working but paying, and just how the system does the right thing. And then also salary sacrifice in payroll. Um, we'll have a quick look at a little presentation, which I'm going to start, not from the start, but we'll start and have a look at. But before we do that, I'm going to pop over to Opera and just show you where you do in the pay periods area where we earlier came in to look at which pay period we are calculating for. If it's weekly payroll, if we close for a 2 week period over the Christmas time, for example, I can come in here, I can put the week company holiday on 2, say okay to that. When I then calculate week 35, which is my open period, it will calculate week 35, do everything it needs to do, and it sets the next calculation period to week 38, because that's the next time I'm going to be calculate. But in the background, it obviously does the right thing in my payroll so that the employee doesn't have a fluctuating PAYE for that period in time. It just evens everything out. So that's a good thing to remember. Then back to our presentation where we can quickly look at the salary sacrifice in payroll and what it means.
Hello, and welcome to this overview introduction to automated salary sacrifice functionality for Opera 3 payroll. My name is Samantha Garrett, and I'm one of the product specialists here at Pegasus Software. Over the next few minutes or so, I'm going to firstly familiarise you to the concept of salary sacrifice, so What is it all about? Why would you as an employer look to introduce a salary sacrifice scheme? How this will then affect your employees? But more importantly, why have we introduced this functionality into Opera 3 Payroll, where I can then go through and demonstrate to you how this operates within the software itself. So what is salary sacrifice? A salary sacrifice arrangement is basically an agreement between the employer and the employee to change certain terms of their contract of employment for financial benefit. The idea behind this arrangement is really quite simple. The employee gives it part of their cash earnings, and in return, the employer provides non-cash benefits that are exempt from tax and/or national insurance. So in some circumstances, salary sacrifice can financially benefit both the employer and the employee by significantly reducing tax and/or national insurance payments that are due. Some examples of salary sacrifice schemes may include pension contributions, childcare vouchers, and cycling to work schemes. So
So I'm going to stop it there. It's just a very brief explanation of the salary sacrifice that happens in Opera. I think most of you might use that, especially for the pension side. Just a reminder that it can be used for other things like cycle to work schemes, as well as childcare vouchers, and it's just set up accordingly in the payroll. I'm going to move on to look at model accounts in the sales ledger, purchase orders, and stock. Just a little explanation about them and why you should be using and how much time they really can save within the organization. I'm also going to talk about recurring entries for our cash book and our nominal, and just very briefly show how you run that and where you set it up. So for our cash book, we have nominal payment sales receipts, for example, that can go through as a monthly recurring payment. This one is electricity, for example, when you're in a fixed term. And then you also have recurring journals, and I'll talk about those when we get to them. And lastly, on this grid, just a reminder that when there are grids in Opera, you can copy the data to Excel so you can manipulate it in Excel. So if we hop over to Opera, very briefly, I want to look at the model accounts. So within our sales ledger, when I create a new sales ledger account, let's call this model 003. Obviously, you can see I've done it twice before. I'm going to use the drop down and create a model account. Now, a model account is an account I use over and over to create a new sales ledger account. So I would want to create a model account for a specific purpose. So let's look at the customer profiles. So let's create a model account for all my Euro traders. And the terms all the Euro traders have is standard customer terms. I'm going to say OK to that. So this is my model account for Euro traders. Don't need to give any of this information in there. Within my action button, I'll have some options. It would be set to the euro because I set it on the first page. I'll have some terms. It would be set to standard customer. Of course, I can overwrite it here to whatever I want it to be. I've got the analysis area here. So if the region, what it is, I don't know, it could be France, it could be that person. It's a trade business, not worry about cost centers. We've got the delivery area. How do we deliver any day of the week? Monday, Friday. Does it come from a specific warehouse? Do they need all an acknowledgement if they place an order? And lastly, in here, we've got the export area, so we can then set the country for them here. For example, and I can save that model account. And now I've got within my list, I've got a model account for Euro customers. in France, and I've got the model account here for US dollars, and it would just be a little bit difference in the settings there. What does it mean though? So when I need to create a new account, I've got a new customer in France I need to sell to, I can just create a new account, France 1, for example. I can create it using a model account. There we go. I can select the model that relates to the kind of customer. It picks everything up for me. I can bring it through. I can now put whatever in there and save my record. And I've got that quickly. I've got a customer set up because it's pulled through from the options. It's pulled through the terms, etc., from that model customer I've set up. In exactly the same way, and I'm not going to show it, I can do exactly the same thing in my purchase accounts. I can set up model accounts in here, and when I set purchase up, a purchase account up, I can use the model to set up the new account. I can also have within my stock, I can have model, I can use a stock item as a model. I don't have models in here, but if I need to set something up that's similar, like for example, I've got Pepsi cans here. If I need to set up Coke cans, for example, and it's the same kind of thing, I can create a new item here, name it what I want, but I can create the stock using existing as model, and then I can say which item I want to use as the model. So in this instance, I'm going to use the same one, and all that happens is it pulls all the information through for me from that model account, and then allows me to overwrite the information into the new item I have set up. For example, and save my item, and it very quickly allows me to set items up that way because I can just copy information from an existing item. And it, as you can see, runs through all the options as it should, and it's pulled information through from the existing item, so I can really just very quickly do that. And the last area I can actually have model items in is within purchase orders, and this perhaps lesser known area. So within my orders area for one of my suppliers, I have something called models, and if I go into models, I will find different model orders set up for this supplier. So for example, at the bottom here, I've got a model called drinks. I can have a quick look at the lines on that model. So that model order has got 3 items on it. Every time I commit to this model, it will order those items for me effectively. So once I've set up a new model by really just creating a new record here, and it sets up a new model for me, I go through the options as I would, set up the items that I want from my system. I'm not going to do another one now. I've got some here, but I can then, once I've got them set up, I can decide I need to order drinks. So I can come in action, I can commit that order. Do you want to commit it? Yes, I want to commit that order. How do I want to print it? Just like that. And what happens now is it tells me it's created a purchase order from that model for me. And if I come back here, close that down, I come to my purchase orders, I'm expecting to see this one here that I've just created coming directly from the model order that I have. That just now goes into my order system and be emailed out to my supplier for ordering. So that's a model account in there. I want to talk about the recurring entries next. So we've got recurring entries in 2 areas. So within our financials cash book area, within your utilities, we've got this post recurring area going off. If I click on the post recurring, it picks up recurring postings for that for the cash book up to the date my system is at. So I'm obviously at the last date of the month today. So it's picked up that there is a monthly recurring entry for electricity, which is a nominal payment that goes through. It just means we might be on a fixed tariff and we pay fixed amount every month. We don't have to worry about the posting. It just happens through the recurring entries here. And I save a sales receipt there and some nominal payment. So any kind of item I can set up. I set this up by going into my cash book, going into my action button and going to recurring, where I can then find recurring items for that, and I can also set a new recurring item up. Posting these is pretty straightforward. I want to accept all of them, and it posts the entry. And in that instance, all those 3 recurring entries would now be posted to my cash book and appear there ready to be reconciled for when we receive our bank statements. The other thing about recurring items I want to mention, and this is a really good one to remember, is in my nominal journals, you would have noticed by now I've got these 4 tick box options here. One of them is called retained. What does retained mean? If I have a journal marked as retained, when I run a period end for the nominal journal, the retained journals stays here in my list. It doesn't go away. A journal that's not retained is posted once, I run a period and it disappears from the list because I've posted it and I've dealt with it. So what would a returning journal be, for example? For example, in this instance, I've got a retained journal for credit card interest. It's been posted 26 times. Why would I retain a credit card interest journal? Well, because the interest might be different every month, but it's the same posting every month. So every month before I post it, I can come in here, instead of setting a new journal up, I can come into this journal and look at the details. I can change the details behind the journal and I can repost the journal. And every month the journal would be posted for me. So within my utilities, I have something called post recurring, and that will pick up all my journals that needs to have a recurring posting. As you can see, all of these are my November ones. One I've imported previously, but I can really just now go and post these journals, and because they were retained journals, they will all be posted, but they will be retained in they will retained in here anyway. And then the last thing I wanted to mention in this area we were at was the copy data from grids into Excel. So whenever I look at anything in Excel where I've got quite a large grid of information, I don't know, let's open sales order processing. Let's go down to invoices in there. See if we can find, there we go, some with a bit more information. I can right click on any of these grids I see in Excel, click on copy data, open my Excel, and literally just paste that data in there. It gives me all the data I need. I can use that now, do whatever I need to do, use the functionality. It's a proper Excel sheet that I have within the system here. So just a good thing to remember if you ever want to quickly take something. And I'm just going to pull that over there. It's a pop-up from Opera, the system I'm currently using, and it's just going to stay there, and I'll show you later on what that means too. So that was the copying data from a grid. So I've just talked about retained and recurring journals. So that was the retained journal. I talked about retained when I should have talked about recurring, but the principle is the same. And then I run the recurring journals. So we won't be looking at that again. I want to mention the views and how useful they might be to anybody looking at data within the Opera system. Just coming quickly back to the nominal journals, I wanted to talk and just make clear what these settings are. So the recurring here means it's a journal that I post on a monthly basis, and that might be something like the where is it? Yeah, period end accruals. There we go. The period end accruals, which is a recurring journal, because I have an accrual that I post every month again. I can come in, I can change the details on the journal before it recurs every month, but it stays and it becomes part of that recurring process I ran from utilities. The retained means I post a journal, and when I run the period end, it stays in this list, and I can come in here and I can post it over and over and over again with details that I've changed every month. That would be something like a company credit card or something like the credit card interest. It's every month. It's just the amounts that change. And then views are something that exists in most of these modules. You've got a view in our sales area, and you can look at the criteria behind this. What the view does, it gives me information based on a range of dates of what I want to see. For example, here I set my own view up. These views are set up in the maintenance area views of all the modules that they appear in, and you can set your own view with different levels up. So you can see mine is set to month here, analysis code in the sound, month, year, sorry, month, analysis code, and then account. And it really gives me the information that I want to see behind this information. I can double click on any of those areas and it will take me through and show information that I want there. And again, this is where the grids come in, because I could copy that data and drop it into Excel and look at it, a large lot of data from my system. I find the nominal view one of the most useful, because very quickly I can set something like a P&L in here for myself that I run. It gives me my breakout of my nominal ledger structure, which you'll see in a moment. But the nominal ledger structure, it gives me a kind of P&L. I can look at my fixed assets, for example, what sits underneath it, what is that, and drill down right to bottom functionality. And I can even see the journals that makes up the information that comes and sits behind there. Within here, we can copy our data, the same idea. We can copy that data and drop it into Excel, and we can use charts of information to visually represent the data that we are showing on the screen. And I've done something now and it's not happy with me. As you can see, it's telling me it's not responding, but there you go. Give me some sort of a graph, can change the bars, etc., etc. Only show what the debits and credits are, etc., and print it from here, export it, and look at some criteria. It's a very powerful area for reporting purposes and to very quickly look at data. I personally use this on a daily basis in our system. It appears in costing, it appears in purchase, it appears in nominal, it appears in sales. You have this in payroll and HR. Payroll and HR especially, it could be very useful for people who don't use this, because you can really break down information in here in a way that you want to see it. And it display comparatively whatever you want to see for years at an end. So it's very good functionality to use and to remember to use. Okay, so let's move on. So I'm going to not run a backup, but just remind you of taking a backup without files and folders. And I'm going to run through a scheduler with how you schedule some information and the messaging service in there, and a reminder of emailing of documentation within the payroll side. So firstly, taking a backup without additional files and folders. The reason you don't need to update the additional files and folders, you all know how to access a backup, um, is because this enlarges the backup significantly, and it's not needed because where the files and folders are left, you really don't need to back them up every time you do a backup. So our suggestion is always to run it without that. Two reasons: a, it's much faster, and it doesn't inflate the storage space on where these backups are kept because it's really not necessary. I would suggest that you always ever just back up one company at a time, because if you really need to go back to a backup, you can't. You have three companies backed up, then you have to go back to all three companies at that point in time. Whereas if you only individually back a company up, you can select to only do that company and go back in time for that specific company if you really need to do so. I'm not going to run this now, but this will just run through and backs up. And I would always not include the additional files and folders in this. So the scheduler, you would have noticed that the scheduler sits within the administration area. And for those users who got access to it, there's four things within there. We've got messaging, shutdown, and task scheduler and calendar. I'm going to open the task scheduler, and as you can see here, you can create a new task. So what is the tasks for? I've created some before, but I'm going to just do a new one so I can talk through the option. So there's a whole host of tasks we can do, everything from UDS, system data files, tidy files, database backups, period ends, rebuild histories, sales period end, purchase period end, or you can set off a chain of events. A chain of events is run a UDS, then run a period end, then do a backup, then run this, then run that. And that's the idea of that. Just going to briefly perhaps show and set up a backup. Backup company A, first one in our list. So this allows me to set this backup to run at a time when I know no one should be in the system or busy using the system. So it's asking me when do I want to run it, as a specific day of the week, a day of the month, a specific date, or it should be included in chains. I'm going to just go with a specific day of the week. Every Friday at 7 o'clock, I want it to back up the first company in my list. I don't want it to include all the additional files and folders, and I can just say okay to that. Now you can see up here, I've got one set up. That's one I've just set up. And when the date and time comes every week, it will run that backup for me. If I look similar to one of these, I can right click, I can view the last run details and the history of these tasks, so I can see when it was last run and when it wasn't run, if there were errors, did it run through, what happened. I can also edit these tasks or obviously delete them from the list here. Another area I want to talk about is a repeat invoicing area that we might want to use. In my sales order processing, I've got something called repeat. And when I run my repeat invoicing for a date or dated, I tell it what I want to do, email and print invoices or whatever I want to do here, I can use the scheduler. And when I do, I can overwrite information. And when I do, it will set up a task for me in my scheduler that will run that at a time that I now specify. Still want to run it within my November month. So I'm going to run it tonight at 10 when I know no one else is going to be working. And all it does now is put that tasks within my list here and it will run. And the last thing I want to mention within here is scheduling is the messaging service. So messaging allows me to give instructions or messages to users of the Opera system, and it will pop up like you saw earlier on the screen as a reminder for them for as long as you set the reminder to be on for. I could, for example, set a reminder for expenses to pop up once for 3 days. If I click on the preview, and we can see the preview appear on our screens. I want to move on to the emailing functionality. Emailing our P45s is newer functionality that's more recently been added to our systems. And as you now know, when you run the email function, the P45 functionality, you have the option to do an email, obviously with attachments, but you can email the P45 out to all those people that you need to, making it a much quicker process. Obviously, you are aware of emailing payslips and P60s. I did want to mention with the emailing of documentation, when you look at the history of an employee by period, you have the availability to email a P60 in hindsight to have given it when it's happened. So it's just one of the options available within the action button is to re-email my P60 for an employee if he comes to me and says, I don't have it anymore. So just a good thing to remember that I can do that within the system. Obviously asking me which year. I can go through and I can send that and it will email it out to the email address that appears on my employee record. Right, let's move on. I want to talk about, or just a reminder about the retrospective reporting that appears for debtors and creditors. We have that both within our debtors reporting as well as in our creditors reporting. So if we just pop back into our Opera for a moment, we can look at our debtors reports. We can see, we can run our debtors report there. Debtors report will always give me debtors information as is right now when I'm running it for, nothing excluded. But with the retrospective reporting, you'll notice two additional fields here at the bottom. The first one is produce report as at. So when do I want to see this report for? I might want to look at the first 6 months of the year. So I can say 30th of June. And I might want to say I want to see the transactions. Let's say OK to that and run that report. And all that happens now, it gives me a debtors report that I can see. Here it tells me at the bottom it's produced today, but as at the 30th. And then it goes down and per customer that appears on the debtors report as at the 30th of the 6th will also show me the transactions that made up the information as at that point. I've got exactly the same available within the creditors side for my creditors and retrospective creditors reporting. So let's move on. Next thing we'll look at is open period accounting. I'm really just going to show you very briefly where the calendar is when you use and select to use open period accounting. I'll explain the multi-level nature of the nominal ledger, and we'll have a brief look at rectifying allocations and just the functionality that everybody really should be aware that is available within Opera. So if we pop back into our our system. So if you use open period accounting against the company profiles within administration area, open period accounting is a tick box that we tick on whether we use or not. When we use open period accounting within our nominal ledger, we suddenly use the financial calendar that sits in there rather than the calendar that sits in set options. Open period accounting means that I can look at my financial calendar for around 3 years in advance to my current year, but of course all the historical periods still sits in here. I'm currently in 2023, period 10, and what I notice is when I finish my run, my period ends, especially my nominal, it will then block all the periods that it's closed down, keeping open the periods that go into the future. You'll notice in here I've got all the periods open, so I can really post anything up to 2.5 years about from now. As an administrator of the system, if I need to come back and repost anything or do anything in a previous period, I have the ability to come in here to open a period, open a sales period, do some sales transactions, save that, do some sales transactions, come back and block those periods again. That process will do exactly the right thing with brought forward figures for our nominal accounts. If I look back at the previous year, you will notice that the periods are closed. When I do a year end on my nominal, it closes everything pre that year instead of just blocking it. And again, I could open this and repost information. If my accountant has given me journal information to post pre, I can come and do it in here. The multi-level nature of our nominal ledger is pretty easy to see. I'm going to open my types, my subtypes, my accounts, my cost centers. And let's have a quick look at these. So firstly, my first level of analysis is highest level available, and that's the class. The class is applied to all the types I have. So the classes is expense, income, liability, current asset, fixed asset, capital, and reserves. I set up a whole list of types, which I apply throughout my system and for setting up. That's the first two levels. Underneath that level, I now have my subtype. And as you can see, the subtype is a combination of type and subtype. So the subtype gives me the next level down. So the third level down, if I look at fixed assets, for example, I have four subtypes, sorry, of freehold buildings, office equipment, motor vehicles, fixtures, fittings, and vehicle equipment as 5 different subtypes to the type of fixed assets. After that, I have my account. And if we just find a sales account here, for example, I have my account and you can see the subtype applied over here. So that's now my 4th level of analysis down. Within my nominal ledger, I also can have cost centers. This system has 4 cost centers set up. Against my nominal ledger, each cost center can exist, as you can see here on the same account, with the same subtype, for example, but it is the next level of analysis down. And then very lastly, on the actual account, you will notice a project and a department. This is 2 additional areas of analysis that's available that you can make optional or mandatory for whenever you post any transactions against this nominal code. When it's optional, you get to choose from the preset up projects and the same department that has been existed in there. If it's mandatory, you get to choose the same, but you have to choose one. Optional, you obviously don't have to. It's optional to choose one. Why would you use these? Well, it's a way of putting together a project, a piece of work, a department's work, anything like that that you want to pull together and be able to report on separately. So just a good thing to remember the different levels of analysis available down my nominal. And then the last thing I want to mention is rectifying of allocations. When we rectify allocations, it's a very straightforward process of going into the action button, picking up rectify allocations. We'll just pick up whatever we can find. We can't find anything there. So here we can find one, and we can see I've got an allocation here of 62 and another one of the same amount. There are two allocations. One might have been wrong. The second one here, I can see an allocation number that pulls it together for me. I can pull this check in. I can double click that one. And what happens is everything that goes with the allocation is highlighted. If I want to remove the allocated transactions, I can tick on there. If I've totally posted it on the wrong account, for example, I might want to remove them. I'm going to click on next. It wants to give me a reason for the unallocation, and I can run that. It will give me a report of what it's unallocated for me. Next step is it wants to ask me if I want to reallocate the transactions. I can say yes, and I can go back in and reallocate what there is, or I can just say no, and all that would happen is it would sit unallocated on the account. Something to remember is if you deal with foreign currency accounts, when you do the unallocation or rectify allocation, it's a good idea to remove the, or you have to remove the cash book transaction as well for the process to work. So let's move on and very briefly talk about Opera 3 importing. I'm going to play you a short video that talks about importing. I did quite a few years ago, but remember I did a whole webinar on importing during the year, so it could be good to have a look at that. So moving on from that one, um, people profiles. So the people profiles is a place where you can create one or more person records. These may be any individual who may be referenced in your system. So irrespective of module or company, the function is quite distinct from the user profiles, since the people records have no bearing on the access rights to the options in the system. Instead, this function is provided to maintain a central table of individuals who may be associated with records within the system. For example, in purchase invoice register, a person may be identified as someone to assign to transaction, while in costing, a person may be identified as an employee or a subcontractor and project leader. And by using these profile commands, you can maintain the details of all the people who may be processed in various modules and thereby reduce the amount of effort needed to specify their details in more than one part of the system. Also, just a reminder that the personnel application is automatically included with your payroll system and integrates with payroll. As a result, both applications share some of the same employee details. Um, a new record automatically appears in personnel when you create it in payroll. And it's just a way of recording additional information that's not payroll, really payroll related, but employee related. So let me pop over to Opera and we can have a quick look at these two. So the people profiles is where we in maintenance administration, we have our user profiles, but we also have our people profiles. And as you can see, it really is just a name, address, and phone list of the people in your organization and who they are. If they can be an employee, a project leader, a subcontractor, you can set everyone in your organization up in here, regardless of whether or not they are Opera users. And like I said, then this information can be used right throughout the system for when we need to allocate something to a person, like in costing or in the purchase module and purchase invoice register. Also, just want to mention personnel inclusion in the system automatically. We have the ability to come in here and look at employee information, which obviously matches what we have in our payroll. But in addition to that, within our action button here, we've got some additional things. We can look at absence, not the statutory sick pay absence, but the normal absence we can record in here. We can also include training, disciplinary, job and salary details, and apply working patterns here to our employees. Why would I use personnel? Perhaps I have someone who deals with all this information, but it's not a payroll person and they don't do the payroll calculation or anything to do with payroll. But they can come in here and they can deal with things like an absence because they don't do the calculation. They just tell the system when an absence has occurred. So remember, personnel free with the payroll system. I want to move on and we're going to have a brief look at something called stock landed costs. Let's show you how you set that up, where you use it, perhaps why you want to use that. Just a little reminder that exists in the system. Then I'm going to show you, come back and show a brief video on consolidation in the system, perhaps one of the most lesser known functionalities that is used. So let's quickly pop back into Opera. If I want to use stock landed costs again in my maintenance area of administration against my company profiles on the options button, there is something called landed costs. If I tick landed costs on, I use landed costs within my system. In the supply chain management area in stock maintenance, I then have something called landed cost groups, and I have landed cost types. So my groups I can set up is really just a label that I set up all the different kinds of groups of landed costs. As you can see, it could be freight, import taxes, insurance, purchases, warehousing, etc. That might be an additional cost to the actual cost of the item I'm buying. After that, I can then set up these different landed cost types, which I then apply to my stock items. So in this instance, I can see I've got quite a few in here. There's something like anti-dumping duty, there's excise duty, and the idea is here I apply which group this comes from or applies to, and what value is it? Is it a fixed value or is it a percentage value that I'm using? I can also specify landed costs in nominal accounts here if I want to separate that detail within my nominal ledger. Against my stock items then, and I'm just going to scroll through and find one with landed costs so we can have a look at that. Someone like here, for example, I've got a component, and in here I've got something called landed costs, and as I can see, I apply landed costs to this stock item. I can set the type and the value. The type comes from the stock items types that I've selected in there. I can the value pulls through, but I can overtype it here if I need to, and say if I apply this, it sits in the bottom. I can create a new one as I do in Opera by using my icon, and I can have quite a list of them going down there. Every time I then purchase this item, automatically the system will calculate what that landed cost is and apply it to my stock item for me. If something doesn't use landed costs, okay, let's just find one like that. I can come in here, I can apply landed cost to it. I can type what type it is and apply the landed cost to the purchase price. Back to consolidation. Again, I'm going to show a really short video on consolidating different systems into one main company. Next, I want to move on to the Making Tax Digital VAT Center. So when you run VAT reports, it's important to try and leave the from date blank so that it includes out of period transactions. It is so that you don't miss out any exceptions. So when you run the reporting, remember to leave the from date empty. Another thing that's recently popped up, but just a reminder to customers who use this area, is that periodically HMRC will ask you to reauthorize the MTD center. Roughly every 18 months, we believe they do that. So just all you have to do is follow through and do that. So let me pop back into Opera and just show you what I mean. In the Making Touch digital, the VAT center sits there, but these VAT reports and the ones in there is pretty much the same. If we look at an audit, a detailed VAT audit trail, for example, it is the from and to dates here that you can leave empty, so you can run it too. So it includes all information for you. Just a little thing to remember. I just pulled everything through now, but now it would do everything for me. And the second thing I said is the authorization. Now, my system isn't authorized, but you'll get this similar message to this saying that it needs to be authorized. You don't need to call us. All you have to do is say, yes, I'm going to do that. And it will take you through the link where you just can follow through and you can use your government gateway details to sign in, and that will authorize your system again for them so you can carry on using it as you would. So that's pretty much the last one I had, although I've got three very important things to mention. Firstly is please have a look at the Oasis Customer Zone website. You will find a whole host of information there, a place to log online support calls, bookings for the payroll seminars and upgrade booking forms and that kind of thing, all sits within the Customer Zone. Also, feel free to pop over to the news section. You find in About Us News. I try and post some articles often, and there is always information available. It's broken down in categories, so you can have a look at all the webinars for the year, for example, in one place. Effortlessly look and find what it is you are looking for. And lastly, I want to urge you guys to follow us on our YouTube channel, where I'm always releasing information and videos, short videos about the system, some training stuff, and some fun videos too. So you can always follow us on there. So thank you very much for listening. I think that is about all we have time for today. Any questions from anybody? I don't think there was anything. We covered quite a lot, so I'm going to move on. Again, just a reminder, if things happen on the Customer Zone, go and follow us often and perhaps set it as the desk page in your Opera 3. And then thank you very much again, and hope that I can entice you to join me next month on the 14th as we have our last webinar for the year, and it really is just a fun Christmas event with a bit of a quiz and some prizes. So thank you for listening and hope to see you soon.